So this evening, being our Anagārika ordination, we have 3 candidates who have requested to go forth as Anagárikas, and we'll just looks like more or less everybody's here, everybody's gathered. So the first part of the ceremony is where the Anagārika candidates will do a request that's actually found in the suttas. It's a reflection that comes up before people become monks, but we've included that as part of the Anagārika ordination ceremony, so they'll be doing the request in Pali and English, and it's a very brief request where they're going to be offering me their whites that are prepared and ready for their Anagārika ordinations, Anagārika hood. And then I'll just be handing the trays back to them, and they'll put their whites on. Then the main body of the ceremony will occur once they're actually in their whites. So without further ado, I'll call the 3 of you up to come forward and begin the ceremony. Receive each of these. I'll leave them there. Don't want to get them mixed up.
Sambadogarawaso Rajopato Abokaso Pabaja Naidang Sukarang Agarang Ajawasata Ekanta Paripunang Ekanta Parisudang Sankalikitang Brahmacharyang Charitum Yang Nunahang Kesamasung Oharetwa Kasayani Wattani Chadetwa Agarazama Anagaryang Pabajayam. The household life is cramped and dusty. The homeless life is free as air. It is not easy living the household life, to live the fully perfected holy life, purified and polished like a conch shell. Suppose I were to shave off my hair and beard, don the robes of a Buddhist monastic, and go forth from the household life into homelessness.
Okay, so having done that request, then I will give you your whites minus the sitting cloth. Once I've given all of you your whites, then you'll be able to back out and put them on. Maybe you could ask our Anagārika trainer and Ajahn Shuddha, Tanrakito. Now you can go into the monk's office and they'll help you put the pavillons on and everything else. I'll have to check with Ajahn Kuradamo about this, but I had been wondering not too long ago about the word pavillon. It's like a training robe that the Anagārikas use, and it's French for wrap, isn't it?
French for something.
To fly. Butterfly. Okay.
Papillon, right?
Well, the pavillon, par avion means by air, right? No, it's not that. It's pavillon. But in Temple Forest Monastery, they just call it the wrap. But we're going to follow tradition and call it the pavillon. It's a training robe that they will be, in addition to their white jackets, white pants, they will be wrapping this training robe around themselves. And the wearing of white, it's the first level of ordination at a Bayagiri monastery. So this was instituted by Ajahn Chah. Who, for those of you who don't know who Ajahn Chah is, he passed away about 30 years ago now. And he was this is a Ajahn Chah lineage branch monastery. I believe a Bayagiri is branch monastery number 253 of Wat Nong Papong. And he instituted this Anagārika training to give a long period of pre-training before becoming a novice, and then the opportunity to become a fully ordained monk known as a bhikkhu, fully ordained Buddhist monk. A bhikkhu in the Theravada tradition. Theravada means way of the elders, and really what that implies is just that we keep a lot of rules and have a strict code of discipline that we keep, stemming back to the original code of conduct laid out by the Buddha over 2,500 years ago. So we could say we're a group who has been around for more than 2 millennia and still follows their original constitution, their original code of conduct. And so our 3 Anagārika candidates, Jack, Kiran, and Sean, when they come back in, they'll be in their whites, and there will be a lot of changes that take place. They'll have their own bowls. They'll just practical changes. They'll eat with the Sangha in the dining hall, and they'll learn how to help out in various ways, washing the monks' bowls and so on, and just wearing the whites. It's a training in mindfulness. Just trying to keep your whites clean is a practice in and of itself. And the wearing of white, really, what it comes from is in the suttas. People who followed the brahmacharya, or the lay people, householders who followed the celibate life but lived as householders, still had a livelihood. They would wear white. And a lot of these white-robed lay followers of the Buddha were actually great disciples and had actually attained stages of awakening themselves. Famous characters in the suttas like Panchakanga, who was a non-returner and yet still lived as a layperson. Or Gatikara, so Gatikara the potter. These are these white-robed lay people. So the Anagārika ordination is actually just partly taken from the idea of the white-robed layperson in the suttas. And it's a dipping your toes in the monastic form, testing the waters, seeing if it's suitable for one's character, a suitable form of lifestyle that one might want to pursue. So the Anagārika training is really a first step if one is thinking of a monastic vocation and living in that way. And we generally held to be a 1-year commitment. And then as you get close to the end of that year, someone can think either, okay, well, that was a good training, good experience, but maybe not for me, go back to household life, or one might actually decide to go further and take on the next step toward ordination, or the novice, what we call samanera ordination. That's another year of training before bhikkhu. So the Anagārika training is considered to be the first gate of ordination, first gate of bhikkhu ordination. it can always be a bit of a practice, a little bit difficult to have this wrap, this pavillon, this training robe on for the first time. So when our 3 candidates come back in, they'll be having trays of offerings, but also bowing and trying to keep their wrap on, trying to keep their pavillon on. And this is just something that takes some time, takes some getting used to. It gives a bit of an introduction to wearing the robes that the monks wear, the jiwan, the upper robe, the one that we roll up and flip over our left shoulder. So this gives a bit of an introduction to that. And it's also learning how to just conduct oneself a bit more slowly, a bit more beautifully, and develop. This is part of the tradition from Thailand. If you watch Thai monks, just moving about very gracefully, and so the robes can actually help us to train in that way, help us to move about a bit more gracefully, a bit more beautifully, a bit more slowly, and that's the training in mindfulness that we do here in the monastery. Our 3 new Anagārikas will be formally requesting the 8 precepts. Always nice to see new Anagārikas. And pro tip right off the bat, you tuck under the left shoulder. That's going to really keep it from falling off. Precept request.
Mayang bante ti saranena saha atta silani yachama dutiyampi mayang bante ti saranena saha atta silani yachama tatiyampi mayang bante ti saranena saha atta silani yachama.
Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa.
Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa.
Buddhaṃ saranang gacchami.
Buddhaṃ saranang gacchami.
Dhammang saranang gacchami.
Dhammang saranang gacchami.
Sanghang saranang gacchami.
Sanghang saranang gacchami.
Dutiyampi buddhang saranang gacchami.
Dutiyampi buddhang saranang gacchami.
Dutiyampi dhammang saranang gacchami.
Dutiyampi dhammang saranang gacchami.
Dutiyampi sanghang saranang gacchami.
Dutiyampi sanghang saranang gacchami.
Tatiyampi buddhang saranang gacchami.
Tatiyampi buddhang saranang gacchami.
Tatiyampi dhammang saranang gacchami.
Tatiyampi dhammang saranang gacchami.
Tatiyampi sanghang saranang gacchami.
Tatiyampi sanghang saranang gacchami.
Tit sarana kamanang nititang.
Amabante.
Panatipata veramani sikaparang samadhiyami.
Panatipata veramani sikapadang samadhiyami.
I undertake the precept to refrain from taking the life of any living creature.
I undertake the precept to refrain from taking the life of any living creature.
Adina dana veramani sikaparang samadhiyami.
Adina dana veramani sikapadang samadhiyami.
I undertake the precept to refrain from taking that which is not given.
I undertake the precept to refrain from taking that which is not given.
Abrahmacharya veramani sikaparang samadhiyami.
Brahmacharya veramani sikapadang samadhiyami.
I undertake the precept to refrain from any intentional sexual activity.
I undertake the precept to refrain from any intentional sexual activity.
Musawada veramani sikaparang samadhiyami.
Musawada veramani sikapadang samadhiyami.
I undertake the precept to refrain from lying.
I undertake the precept to refrain from lying.
Sura meraya maja pamadatana veramani sikaparang samadhiyami.
Sura merya maja pamadatana veramani sikapadang samadhiyami.
I undertake the precept to refrain from consuming intoxicating drink and drugs which lead to carelessness.
I undertake the precept to refrain from consuming intoxicating drink and drugs which lead to carelessness.
Vikala bhojana veramani sikaparang samadhiyami.
Vikala bhojana veramani sikapadang samadhiyami.
I undertake the precept to refrain from eating at inappropriate times.
I undertake the precept to refrain from eating at inappropriate times.
Nacha gita varita visukadasana malaganda vilepana dharana mandana vibhusanatana veramani sikaparang samadhiyami.
Nacha gita vadita visukadasana mala ganda vilepana dharana mandana vibhusanatana veramani sikapadang samadhiyami.
I undertake the precept to refrain from entertainment, beautification, and adornment.
I undertake the precept to refrain from entertainment, beautification, and adornment.
Uchasayana mahasayana veramani sikaparang samadhiyami.
Uchasayana mahasayana veramani sikapadang samadhiyami.
I undertake the precept to refrain from lying on a high or luxurious sleeping place.
I undertake the precept to refrain from lying on a high or luxurious sleeping place.
Imani yata sikapadani samadhiyami.
Imani yata sikapadani samadhiyami. Imani yata sikapadani samadhiyami. Imani yata sikapadani samadhiyami.
Imani yata sikapadani silena sugating yante silena boga sampada silena nibuting yanti tasama silang visota ye.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
Sit comfortably. This is one of the more difficult parts of the Anagārika ordination, is sitting on your toes for a long period of time. And so traditionally, we'll go through the refuges and the precepts that you've just taken and done in the Pali language. And so there's the two parts to that. There's not just the precepts, there's also the first homage to the Buddha, that's the Namo Tassa part, and then there's the Buddhang Saranang Gacchami, Dhammang Saranang Gacchami, Sanghang Saranang Gacchami. So that's the taking of the precepts, taking the refuges before you take the precepts. And when we take refuge, that's actually, it's something you've been doing already, living here in the monastery, taking the refuges and precepts on the lunar observance days regularly. So you all served the winter retreat, and you've been here for a long time already. And so already familiar with refuges and precepts. Now formalizing it and actually putting on these Anagārika uniforms, it can cause you to deepen that sense of practice and training in terms of the refuges. And the refuges is refuge in Buddha, refuge in Dhamma, refuge in Sangha, taking those refuges 3 times. And there's the external refuges and the internal refuges. Really, the internal refuges are what's more important. So the external refuges, we can get inspired by these by, say, the historical Buddha, thinking about the Buddha's life, and the historical Buddha, things that happened in the Buddha's life, the practice, the path of practice that the Bodhisattva, before he was the Buddha, undertook. And we can inspire ourselves by thinking of the historical Buddha in that way. But then the internal refuge of Buddha is just knowing, and actually coming back to that sense of mindfulness and clear knowing in the present. And that's how we try to take stock of what's going on for us at any given time. And we could also think of it as taking refuge in the practice itself, taking refuge in the meditation. That would be the internal refuge of Buddha. And then the Dhamma, the external refuge of Dhamma, would be the Buddha's teachings contained in the suttas, what we have passed down to this day, and the teachings of the different ajahns, the different teachers, the different meditation masters from Thailand and elsewhere that we have inherited to make use of for ourselves in this day and age. So the teachings themselves would be the external Dhamma refuge, that we can actually rely on that. A refuge is something we can rely on, and a place of safety. The internal Dhamma refuge is the truth of the way things are. And so we can take refuge in looking at the present, just seeing how things are in the present. The internal Buddha, knowing the internal Dhamma, so the internal Buddha being the knowing, and then the internal Dhamma just being the truth of the way things are in the present. And we also call that Satya, or truth. The Sangha, the external Sangha refuge, is the community. Sangha just means community. So community of precept holders, community of practitioners, community of spiritual friends that we can really rely on. And being in the midst of spiritual friends, that's a refuge, that's a place of safety. Internal Sangha refuge would be virtue itself, that we can rely on having a sense of virtue that creates a foundation for our lives, a foundation for our practice. So that's the internal Sangha refuge. So externally, the 3 refuges would be the historical Buddha, the Buddha's teachings, and the community of practitioners. Internally would be the knowing, the truth of the way things are, and virtue. So those are things we can rely on. Those are refuges, places of safety that we acknowledge and we go to. And when we also take refuge, it's acknowledging we're always taking refuge in something. We're always taking refuge in something, whether it's just taking refuge in being able to just go watch TV or drink or whatever. Those are things we normally take refuge in. Those are things we normally rely on. So we also call this a change of refuge, or a change of lineage when you take refuge in Buddha Dhamma Sangha. And then the precepts, it's traditional during these ordinations to go through the 8 precepts one by one. And they're more or less self-explanatory. A few of them might need a little bit more explanation. The first precept is to refrain from taking the life of any living being. And this refers to intentionally taking life. So if we unintentionally take life, you don't break that precept. If you intentionally take life, say a mosquito lands on you and you think, you intentionally slap the mosquito, kill it, that would be a breach of the first precept. But say if you unintentionally take life, say you feed an animal, so you have some compassion for an animal and you feed it a sort of food that you weren't supposed to feed it or that you didn't know was bad for it and it dies, that would not be a breach of the rule because it would be unintentional. But if you were to intentionally kill, say, an insect or an animal, or in the worst case, a human being, which there would be really much worse repercussions to that than just having to say that you broke the precept. But these, just to know that it refers to intentionality. All these precepts are for seeing intention much more clearly. Also, say something like self-defense. Say a mad dog attacks you and you kick it away. And it happens to die. That's not a breach of the rule because your intention wasn't to kill it, but your intention was self-defense. So in the rules, self-defense is clearly allowed. It's just good to know that right at the outset. And the second precept, refraining from taking that which is not given. So this is the way it's worded, refraining from stealing. It's just developing a strong sense of trust in the community with our possessions. As monastics, we tend to have less possessions than your average person. I think somebody calculated at one time that the average community member at Abhayagiri has about 1/10. It's about 1/10 the cost of living of an ordinary person in the U.S. So we live with less possessions, and then when we have that precept of refraining from taking that which is not given, we just rely on what comes, and we just train ourselves to be content with what comes, and we are well supported here, so there's plenty of food and requisites, but when maybe we might have a day when those aren't enough, and then to learn about practicing contentment with just what we have or going without from time to time. And that develops a strong sense of trust in the community. We don't have to be looking over our shoulder that somebody's going to take something from us. And so that's what the second precept is pointing to. And the third precept is refraining from any form of sexual activity, sexual gratification. And this is the third precept in the 5 precepts. The third precept is defined as it's kamesu michachara, so not engaging in sexual misconduct, which refers to not cheating on your partner or not engaging in sexual conduct with someone who's underage, and so on. And so with the third precept in these renunciate precepts, the third of the 8 precepts, it becomes full celibacy. And this one it takes time to learn how to practice with it, how to get used to it. And we're very strict with this one. So although the Buddha never allowed physical punishments, but it can be physically difficult to hold all of these precepts. And this one is really what defines the brahmacharya, what defines a samana, what defines a religious seeker in terms of that, taking that step into letting go of coarser forms of sensuality in order to train the mind to be cool, content, and peaceful, and bright, And not everyone can do it, and it's worth trying it out. The Buddha gave various practices for being able to follow this third precept better. There's the Asubha practices, which you'd be familiar with already. And there's also it just helps us to have more normal relations with everybody around us. The fourth precept is the Musawada, which the old translation of that in our previous chanting book was to refrain from false and harmful speech. So we've come up with the newer chanting book has a more literal translation of that, is to refrain from lying. And personally, I prefer that previous translation, which it refers to refraining from lying, but also refraining from harsh speech. Is the 4 courses of wrong speech, which is lying, divisive speech, harsh speech, and idle chatter. Of course, that lots of questions when we talk about refraining from idle chatter. There will be a lot of questions that come up about that. Is why is that wrong? Why do I have to refrain from idle chatter? And so idle chatter, it isn't really that big of a deal to engage in idle chatter, but when it's taken, actually the word in Pali is kind of a funny word, is sambapalapa is the word for idle chatter, which is defined by the Buddha as speech which is useless or has no point to it. So trying to really curb our speech to that it's meaningful, it has a point to it. And so you might need to, say, speak about worldly subjects, for example, but it might be that you're being there for somebody, you're being a friend to somebody. That speech has a point to it. So it might be somewhat worldly, but it's actually not sambapalapa because it has a point to it. You're trying to help somebody, trying to be there for somebody. But if it's just, you drank too much coffee after the meal and it's just kind of motor mouth going for a long time, then about nothing in particular, then you might think, oh, right, that's what the Buddha's talking about, sambapalapa. So, but on the more important, the coarsest level of wrong speech would be lying, and to develop that sense of satyaparami, that sense of just truthfulness and honesty and integrity, really building that up for ourselves, building that up in the heart is very important. The 5th precept, refraining from intoxicants. So just to be clear, we don't allow drinking in the monastery, we don't allow smoking marijuana in the monastery, we don't allow types of other drugs. Some people ask about tea and coffee. Those are allowable drugs in the monastery, if you consider those drugs. So those are allowed. We don't allow cigarettes here. We don't allow betel nut. Those are allowed in some monasteries in Thailand. So really have to kind of follow the standards of the community. But yeah, it's just those. Just to be clear that those particular things aren't allowed, and then mindfulness, just really helping. This precept really helps us to develop mindfulness. And we get into the 3 renunciate precepts, which is not eating at the wrong time. So the right time is defined from dawn rise, which is when you can look outside and you can see the lines in the palm of your hand. That's how we practice with it. So dawn until midday. Midday is defined as solar noon. It changes during the different times of the year. So in the winter, we follow noon. And at this time, in the spring, summer, we follow 1 p.m. as the standard. And that just keeps it clear and simple, easy to remember. So whenever we're in the monastery, we'll try to be finished eating by 1 p.m. If we're out and about, we'll try to be finished eating by 1 p.m. And then in the afternoon, of course, as you know, there's various things that are allowable. Tea, coffee, juice drinks, and the various allowable tonics according to the Vinaya rules. The 7th precept, refraining from entertainment, beautification, and adornment. And so this is, of course, that's 3 English words, and yet I think there's 9 or 10 words in Pali. Nacha, Gita, Wadita, Visukadasana, Mala, Ganda, Vilepana, Dharana, Mandana, Vibhusana, Tana. That's 10 words. So we translate that as entertainment, beautification, and adornment. But if you go into each one, and I don't know the exact translation of each one, but it refers to singing, dancing, wearing perfumes and colognes, rubbing scented unguents on yourself, wearing makeup. You don't have to worry about that with the 3 of you. And there's the, wearing garlands, necklaces, bracelets. So mala, bracelet, we know that one. So but it refers to a summary of it is entertainment, beautification, watching shows, going to shows, which specifically refers to like going to public shows, going to concerts. So it can be summarized as entertainment, beautification, and adornment. And then there's the last one, which is refraining from lying in a higher luxurious sleeping place. This is a living simply rule. So in Thailand, the very traditional way to do this would be to have a simple straw mat or even a cloth just laid out on the floor, on the ground, or in the simple monk's hut called kuti, which is, in Thailand, it could be a bamboo floor, dirt floor, or a hardwood floor. A very simple hut, and a very small hut that you'd either lay a cloth or like a grass mat. We also allow things like thermarests. In the Vinaya, the Buddha allows a bed with legs no longer than 8 inches. And so like refraining, it's a simplicity rule, just refraining from luxuries and just living very simply. And it unburdens us to live in this way and to not have to have a lot of comforts. Of course, some people are going to need to lay on softer surfaces based on their body type. Some people might actually feel better on harder surfaces based on their body type. I know my grandma, before she passed away, she always slept on a hard bed. It was better for her back, and she felt more comfortable in that way. So a hard surface isn't always considered an austerity. It can actually be better for your body. And some of these precepts, some of these rules and teachings suggested, given to us by the Buddha, they're actually better for our health, better for our bodies, even though they may seem like austerities on the surface. So they all have a purpose behind them. And then also, any of these precepts, if you think you've broken one of them, then you can tell myself or one of the other senior monks who you feel comfortable around, who you trust, and then you can talk it over about how to reestablish the precept, how to keep the precept in the future. So, and just to do that, as soon as you think you may have breached one of the rules, it's good to get in the habit of making it known. When there is that openness and honesty, then there's always a way forward with these things. So that's a summary of the refuges and the precepts. And the next part of the ceremony is the formal taking of dependence on me as the teacher, but also you're taking dependence on the community, of course. Tanajan Sek and Ajahn Chunda and the other, Ajahn Kurdadamo, and Longpa, of course. He's not here tonight. He's in England right now, but you're taking dependence, taking what we call nisaya on the senior monks in the community here for your training, and that just gets done in a formalized way in the next part of the ceremony. So I invite you to get back up on your haunches, and you won't need to bow again. You can just actually start with the chanting of taking dependence.
Acharyo me bante hohi, ayasmato nisayo vachami. Acharyo me bante hohi, ayasmato nisayo vachami. Acharyo me bante hohi. Ayasmato nisaya vachami.
Opaikam.
Sadhu bante.
Pati rupam.
Sadhu bante.
Pasadikena sampadehi.
Sadhu bante. Ajatagedani tero mai hangbaro ahampi tera sabaro. Ajatagedani tero mai hangbaro ahampi tera sabaro. Ajatagedani tero mai hangbaro ahampi tera sabaro.
Okay, you can bow 3 times and then sit comfortably again. So yeah, just to briefly translate the meaning of that, when the first part of the chant Acharyo me bante hohi, that means Venerable Sir, may you be my teacher. I shall stay dependent on the Venerable One. Then I say Opaikang, it's suitable, and I say Patirupang, it's proper. Pasadikena sampadehi, you should endeavor to conduct yourself in a good manner. And then the 3 candidates chanted Ajatagedani tero, mai hangbaro, ahampi tera sabaro. It's good, Venerable Sir, from this day onwards the elder will be my burden, and I shall be the burden of the elder. So this mutual relationship that Jack, Kiran, and Sean, having lived here for a period of time, myself and the community, we've decided, yeah, it's a worthy burden to take you on for training. We're willing to put the effort into pointing things out to you, training you in the monastic form, and in the precepts and the practices laid out by the Buddha, and to learn about the Theravada tradition of Buddhism. And also you'll also be in a position of service, serving the community. So not only are you our burden, but we are your burden as well. So there's that mutual taking on of burdens, and it's like being in a family. So it's easy to really maybe think well of somebody when you're not living with them, but then when we live together, then we all start to know each other better, and then that can have the benefits of, you might have gratitude and appreciation for other people's good qualities in the community, and we'll see each other's faults and quirks, and because we're all human and we're all mixed together here, so that's another part of it. And so we have to train ourselves to be very, very forgiving with one another, and learn how to give each other enough space to better ourselves. And because what you're taking on is not easy. It's a struggle, it's difficult, it's generally considered in the world to be something difficult to do. And living in the celibate monastic form, especially in this tradition of Buddhism, is something considered difficult to do. And yet, it is something that can be very, very fulfilling and rewarding over time. And so taking it on, trying it out, a lifestyle of having less distraction and more mindfulness, and trying to develop things like what we call dana barami, service, selfless service, just doing what needs to be done in the community, and then taking a look around, being able to learn as you go, just very basic things about our conduct, some of the first things that tend to get pointed out to new Anagārikas are how they set their bags down. So it always happens that, and it's myself, this happens to everybody, that we go into town with our Anagārika's handbag, and we're accompanying an ajahn to a teaching event, and then we spread out our sitting cloth, sit down, and plop our bag down. And so then the ajahn will say, "No, you don't just plop your bag down. Look at what I'm doing with my bag. Take the handle of your handbag and neatly fold it on top." So that's one of the first things you'll learn. So now you've learned it. But maybe it'll get pointed out to you later as well. There's a lot to learn at first, just practical stuff. You'll be eating out of your bowls now. You won't be able to really go back for seconds in the buffet line anymore. And it'll be a bit more restrained. You'll be learning about how the monastic community takes their meal, partakes of the meal. So a lot of just little changes like that. You'll have access to the MUB now, the Monks Utility Building. You'll have lockers in the common room, in the monks' bowl washing area. So different changes, and kind of like going to school. Kind of like going to school again. You'll have your lockers, and you'll just be beginners in this. But over time you will learn, and you have Anagārika Art, who's been at it for a while now, to show you some of the Anagārika ropes. You have Tan Rakito, who's the official Anagārika novice trainer, so he'll be showing you the ropes as well. And just to take it as it comes, it'll be kind of a lot at first, and then it'll even out. And so welcome to the Whites, welcome to the Anagārika life. And I think now at this point, I'll just invite you to, is there seats set out for them? Yeah, you can, if you just bow to the shrine 3 times, and then you can take, there's seats set out for the 3 of you, and we'll end with the verses of sharing and aspiration. Anumodana, deciding to take this on. So you'll take your sitting cloths, and then you can go to those 3 seats over there. You can leave the mat. You could put your sitting cloths on. So Jack, you'll be first there, and then Kiran, and then Sean near the wall. And we'll end with the chant on page 33, the verse of sharing and aspiration. Seems brighter in here now. Okay. Now let us chant the verses of sharing and aspiration. Through the goodness that arises from my practice, may my spiritual teachers and guides of great virtue, my mother, my father, and my relatives, the sun and the moon, and all virtuous leaders of the world, may the
Unsurpassed is the protection of the Dhamma. The solitary Buddha is my noble guide. The Sangha is my supreme support. Through the supreme power of all these, may darkness and illusion be dispelled.